Imagine a small American town where the morning sun shines gently on quiet streets. But behind one family's door, a little girl is forced to suffer in silence. Her only defender? A loyal German shepherd who refuses to let cruelty win. When her father, a police officer, begins to uncover the truth, the mask of lies starts to shatter, and what follows will leave you breathless. Where are you watching this story from today? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you believe in the power of loyalty, justice, and love, make sure you subscribe so you won't miss the rest of our stories. Wishing you a wonderful day filled with hope and courage. The late autumn winds of Maplewood, a small town nestled between ridges of fading maple trees and winding creeks, swept through the narrow streets like a restless spirit. The season had begun its cruel shift toward winter, and though the afternoon sun still tried to cast a golden glow on the white brick houses that lined Elm Street, a sharp chill pressed against the skin of anyone caught outside too long. The Monroe residence, standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac with its white siding and neatly trimmed hedges, appeared to every passerby as a symbol of comfort and order. Its windows gleamed, the porch was swept, and the small flag by the mailbox fluttered proudly. Neighbors believed this house to be the home of a respected officer and his idyllic family. They could not know that behind the neat facade, silence and shadows had settled like dust in an abandoned hall. Ethan Monroe, a 39-year-old police sergeant, had built his reputation in Maplewood through years of service marked by determination and an unbending sense of duty. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair just beginning to gray at the temples and storm-gray eyes that rarely betrayed emotion, he embodied the image of stability and authority. Years on the force had hardened his features, a strong jawline etched by stress, faint lines creasing his forehead, and a permanent tension in his posture that spoke of battles fought in alleys, courtrooms, and within himself. His colleagues admired him as principled yet reserved, a man who carried the memory of his late wife like an unseen badge. She had died during childbirth, leaving him with their daughter Lily. Her death marked him with guilt he could not scrub away. Ethan worked tirelessly, both to bury his grief and to provide a life his daughter might not remember as broken. But in his attempt to move forward, he had remarried, believing stability for Lily was found in a woman's presence. That woman was Marissa Monroe, his second wife, who at first glance seemed to epitomize grace and charm. At 28, Marissa was slender and tall, with cascading auburn hair she styled meticulously, sharp cheekbones that gave her face an aristocratic poise, and hazel eyes that shifted from warm to cold like autumn light passing through storm clouds. To the neighbors, she was the perfect young wife, always dressed elegantly in form-fitting dresses, heels clicking confidently along the porch, smiling at passers-by with a sweetness that appeared genuine. Yet those who spent more time near her could not ignore the air of calculation beneath her gestures. Raised in a family where appearances were everything but affection was scarce, she had learned to survive through manipulation and charm. Beneath her delicate posture lay a woman who viewed Lily not as a stepdaughter, but as a lingering shadow of Ethan's first marriage, a reminder that she could never erase. And then there was Lily, Ethan's 7-year-old daughter, the heart of the story, though she rarely felt she had one to claim. Small for her age, she had inherited her mother's soft chestnut brown hair and her father's gray-blue eyes that looked older than they should. Her frame was slight, often swallowed by oversized clothes she wore until the fabric thinned. Despite her quietness, there was a gentleness about Lily, the kind that made animals follow her and classmates smile unconsciously in her presence. Yet at home, that gentleness was used against her. She had learned to walk softly on the hardwood floors, to lower her gaze when Marissa's sharp voice rang out, and to bite her lip when hunger clawed at her stomach. Rocco, the last living link to Ethan's past unit, filled the spaces where love should have spoken. The black and silver German shepherd, 9 years old, had once been Ethan's K9 partner, large, muscular, with a coat that gleamed like iron in sunlight and amber eyes that carried the weight of every chase and every save. Rocco was disciplined, loyal, and fiercely protective. Retirement had softened none of his instincts. Around town, he was remembered as the dog who sniffed out narcotics during raids and once pulled a child from under collapsed debris after a storm. In the Monroe household, Rocco became Lily's silent guardian, sensing her distress before any word left her lips. His body positioned itself between her and Marissa more often than chance could explain. To Lily, Rocco was not just a dog. He was the one creature who listened when she whispered fears in the dark. On one brittle afternoon, when the sun struggled to push its fading warmth across the town, the quiet within the Monroe house was pierced by Marissa's voice. The air smelled faintly of bleach, harsh and suffocating. Lily knelt at the bottom of the staircase, her knees pressed against the hard wood, scrubbing the steps with an old rag until her hands turned pink and raw. Her oversized gray sweater, inherited from a neighbor's donation, hung awkwardly on her small frame, sleeves dragging through the suds as she moved. Hunger gnawed at her belly, forcing her to pause occasionally, pressing a hand against herself to quiet the ache. Rocco sat close, head lowered, ears twitching every time Marissa's heels tapped against the tile of the kitchen floor. The German shepherd's amber gaze flicked between Lily and the figure in red seated at the kitchen bar. Marissa, in her crimson dress that clung to her like armor, scrolled through her phone with one manicured hand while the other drummed impatiently against the marble counter. Her lips, painted a shade darker than her dress, curled as she spoke. "A bad child doesn't deserve good food," she said, her tone sharp, as Lily dared to whisper for a slice of bread. Lily lowered her head, her lip trembling. She thought of the soft loaves her grandmother once bought on market days before she passed away, the smell of butter and warmth wrapping around her like a hug. The memory only sharpened her hunger. Unconsciously, she glanced toward the cabinet where leftover bread still sat from breakfast. Her tiny feet carried her softly across the floor, her hand reaching, trembling. Before the piece could touch her lips, Marissa's hand lashed out, ripping it away, the crack of a slap following immediately. The sound echoed in the kitchen like a whip across stone. Lily stumbled, clutching her face, her cheek burning hot, while tears welled up. Rocco erupted into a sharp bark, his body lunging forward until Marissa raised her hand and kicked toward him. He snarled but stopped, hackles raised, every muscle tense as if ready to leap. "You think I wouldn't notice?" Marissa hissed. "You're nothing but a curse, a shadow that should never have been born." Her words, dripping with venom, cut deeper than the slap. She seized Lily's arm, dragging her toward the counter. On the table, a bowl of pumpkin stew sat, its surface filmed with a sour sheen. The smell was rancid, sour, enough to turn the stomach of any adult. Marissa thrust it forward. "Eat! Every last drop! You whine about being hungry, then eat this. This is your lesson?" Lily gagged, tears streaming, shaking her head violently. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please, I'm about to throw up. I can't." Her hands trembled over the plastic spoon, sweat mingling with tears as the scent invaded her nose. Marissa leaned down, her face inches from the child's, her eyes hard as glass. "Eat or starve. Without me, you'd have nothing." Rocco barked again, circling, his paws scraping against the floor, as if he might defy the command that held him back. Lily's sobs filled the kitchen, each sound echoing like a plea to an unseen savior. And then, the sound came. The front door swung open, hinges groaning, heavy footsteps thudding against the polished wood of the hallway. The sound of leather boots and the rustle of a police jacket broke the suffocating stillness. Lily froze, her tear-streaked face lifting in fragile hope. Marissa's hand on her shoulder stiffened. Rocco's ears shot forward, tail rigid, nose flaring at the scent he knew best. Ethan Monroe had come home. Ethan's boots struck the floorboards like a judge's gavel, each step sending vibrations through the silence that had settled in the house. He was still in uniform, the navy police jacket stretched across his broad shoulders, patches on the sleeves dulled by years of weather and duty. His gray eyes, usually shielded behind calm professionalism, narrowed as they swept across the kitchen. He saw his daughter first, Lily kneeling on the tile, a bowl of rancid stew trembling in her hands, her cheeks stained with tears. Her little gray sweater clung to her, damp with sweat and bleach water. Rocco stood rigid by her side, chest puffed, teeth bared at Marissa. Ethan's heart wrenched, guilt and fury colliding in a storm that nearly bent him in half. Marissa froze, but only for a moment. She was a woman who had trained herself to recover quickly from any misstep. the kind of survivor who twisted every flaw into a weapon. Her auburn hair gleamed under the light, her hazel eyes widened theatrically. She clutched her flat stomach with one hand and gasped, her other hand reaching toward Ethan like a wounded bird. "Ethan! Thank God you're home!" she cried, her voice breaking into sobs. "I was only teaching her discipline. She stole bread, she talks back, she doesn't listen. Don't you see how difficult it is for me? And I have to think of the baby." The word baby struck Ethan's chest like a hammer. His late wife's pale face flickered across his memory, her dying words never spoken because he had been too late to return from a call. He saw again the lifeless hand slipping from his grasp, and guilt coiled its claws tighter. Could he risk the life of another child? He staggered for a moment, torn between the child crying before him and the woman feigning fragility. Rocco, sensing hesitation, padded forward and pressed against Lily's side, his body angled like a shield. His fur bristled, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. Ethan's eyes locked on the German shepherd's, and for an instant he felt as though the dog itself was pleading with him. "See the truth." But Ethan swallowed hard and turned his gaze away, his voice thick. "Enough, no more shouting in this house," he said, placing the Pikachu toy gently on the counter. His words were directed to Marissa, but they sounded weak even to his own ears. Lily's wide eyes filled with desperate hope as she whispered, "Daddy, please don't leave me." Yet the shadows in Ethan's expression revealed the war raging inside him. Later that evening, while Ethan sat at his desk upstairs, staring blankly at paperwork he could not read, Lily huddled in her small room with Rocco. The worn Pikachu toy sat on her bed, untouched. Rocco rested his head in her lap, amber eyes watching as her tears soaked into his fur. She whispered to him in broken words, promising she would try harder, scrub faster, complain less, if only things would get better. Outside the closed door, Marissa paced the hallway, her heels ticking like a metronome. When she descended the stairs, she pulled out her phone and dialed. On the other end was her older sister, Veronica Kane. Veronica was in her early 40s, tall and commanding, with sharply cut blonde hair that stopped at her jawline and eyes the color of wet slate. Unlike Marissa's polished elegance, Veronica exuded blunt pragmatism. She had worked in real estate law before scandals pushed her out of the firm, and since then she had lived by cutting corners, using people as stepping stones. "You need to tighten control," Veronica said flatly. "Children are leverage, Ethan's guilt is leverage, and if he falters, you push harder. That's how you win the household." Meanwhile, across town, Angela Porter was grading papers in her small bungalow. The school teacher had noticed Lily's frailty for weeks. Angela was 35, medium height, with chestnut hair tied into a bun and deep-set brown eyes that saw more than children wished adults would. She lived alone with a cat named Jasper, her one companion after losing her fiancé in a car accident 5 years ago. That loss had made her fiercely protective of her students. She believed no child should feel abandoned. She set down her pen, troubled by the memory of Lily's sunken cheeks and trembling hands. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find a way to ask gently what was wrong. Back in the Monroe kitchen, Marissa reheated the pumpkin stew and scraped it into the trash, her lips twisted in disdain. She had lost a battle tonight, but not the war. She poured herself a glass of red wine and stared at the reflection in the glass doors. "He doubts, but not enough," she whispered. "He'll keep doubting until doubt itself breaks him." Lily did not sleep much that night. She lay curled beneath her thin blanket, clutching Rocco's collar, while he sprawled protectively across the doorway. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the hall clock, each second dragging into eternity. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and in her dreams she saw bread she could not reach. At dawn, Ethan left for the station early, the sound of his cruiser fading down the street. Marissa stood at the doorway waving, her face painted with wifely devotion until the car disappeared. Then she turned, her eyes sharpening. By mid-morning, Lily was scrubbing floors again, her knees red, when the phone rang. Rocco's ears perked as Marissa answered, her voice softening into sweetness. It was Veronica again. "Keep the act polished," Veronica advised. "If neighbors see bruises, say she's clumsy. If Ethan sees you cry, remind him of Anna, his dead wife. Men like him drown in guilt. Use it. Marissa nodded silently, glancing at Lily hunched over the floorboards. She won't last if she keeps whining, Marissa muttered. And if she breaks, maybe that's easier. Rocco growled low, as if he understood. He pressed closer to Lily, his fur brushing her shoulder, a barrier against words that cut deeper than blows. That afternoon, Ethan returned briefly to collect a file he had forgotten. He found Lily slumped against the wall, her rag hanging loosely in her hand. For a moment, he crouched, brushing her hair from her forehead. She looked up with gray-blue eyes that mirrored his own and whispered, "Daddy, I'm so hungry." His chest clenched, but before he could answer, Marissa swept in, smiling brightly. "She's exaggerating again, Ethan. I told her lunch is ready after chores. Don't let her manipulate you." Ethan's hand hovered in the air, torn between believing his daughter's hollow cheeks and his wife's confident tone. He sighed heavily and stood, pressing the file against his chest. "Finish quickly, Lily, then eat." He left again, his footsteps heavy. Marissa's smile dropped the moment the door shut. She leaned down, her nails digging into the wood of the counter. "You see, he'll never believe you," she whispered coldly to Lily. "You'll always be nothing more than a burden." Lily closed her eyes, clutching Rocco's fur until her small fingers ached. The German shepherd pressed against her, a silent vow etched into his growl. And as twilight settled over Maplewood, with the last warmth of the sun retreating and the air sharpening into frost, the child's sobs mingled with the steady, protective breath of her only defender. The house that looked so perfect from the street had once again become a chamber of hunger and fear. The following morning in Maplewood arrived with a sky the color of pewter, low clouds pressing against rooftops, carrying the bitter scent of impending rain. The streets were slick with last night's frost thawing under weak sunlight, and the sound of cars passing was muted, as though the town itself sensed heaviness lingering in the Monroe household. Ethan sat at the kitchen table in his plain white shirt and police slacks, the jacket draped over the back of his chair. His face was pale with fatigue, gray eyes shadowed by a sleepless night. Across from him, Marissa prepared oatmeal with a delicate flourish, her auburn hair tied neatly in a bun, her hazel eyes soft with rehearsed kindness. The picture of domestic order would have fooled any visitor, but to Lily, standing at the edge of the doorway with Rocco beside her, it was only another stage performance. Lily's pink dress was wrinkled from the night before, her chestnut hair tangled, her face hollow. She clutched the Pikachu toy to her chest, its stitched smile mocking the despair inside her. Rocco stood slightly ahead of her, his black and silver coat bristling, tail stiff, ears pricked forward. He was ready, as if one wrong tone from Marissa would demand his protection. Ethan's eyes flicked briefly toward his daughter, softening for an instant, but then he turned back to the bowl Marissa placed before him. She laid a hand on her stomach as if unconsciously reminding him of her condition. The silence broke when the doorbell rang. Marissa flinched, then quickly smoothed her expression and glided toward the door. Standing outside was a neighbor, Mrs. Helen Turner, a woman in her 60s known for her habit of observing everyone on the street from behind lace curtains. Helen was short, stout, with thinning gray hair tied in a loose bun, her pale blue cardigan draped around her shoulders. Though nosy, she was not cruel. Years of loneliness after losing her husband in a factory accident had left her clinging to gossip as her only connection. "Morning, dear," Helen said with a polite smile, handing over a small pie wrapped in foil. "I baked too much last night. Thought you might like some." Marissa accepted the pie with her brightest smile. "You're too kind, Helen," she said sweetly, her tone dripping honey. "Ethan has been working so hard, and I must be careful with the baby, but it warms my heart to know neighbors care." Her hand brushed her stomach again. Helen's brows lifted, curiosity sparking. "A baby? Oh, what wonderful news!" She glanced past Marissa into the house, her eyes catching Lily's pale figure. "And how's the little one?" she asked. Marissa's smile stiffened. "She's fine, thank you. Just shy." She shut the door gently, the sweetness fading from her face like light vanishing behind a storm cloud. After breakfast, Ethan left for the station, and Marissa wasted no time. She set the pie on the counter, turned toward Lily, and hissed, "Don't think you'll get a slice. People already believe I'm carrying a child. All you need to do is stay invisible." Rocco growled low, but Lily pressed her hand against his fur to quiet him, tears stinging her eyes. Across town, Angela Porter was preparing her class for morning lessons. She wore a navy cardigan over a white blouse, her hair pulled back with a pencil stuck through the bun. Children's drawings covered her classroom walls in cheerful colors. Yet Angela's eyes lingered on the empty desk, where Lily should have sat more confidently among her peers. She had noticed the girl's silence, the way she avoided eye contact, her hands trembling during reading. That morning, Angela decided to test her instincts. She approached Lily during recess, crouching to meet her at eye level. "Lily, sweetheart, how are you feeling today?" she asked softly. Lily clutched her Pikachu tightly, mumbling, "I'm fine, Miss Porter." Angela smiled gently, but caught the hollowness in the girl's voice. Jasper, her striped tabby cat at home, often behaved the same way when frightened, pretending stillness as defense. Angela resolved silently. She would not let this child slip through unnoticed. Meanwhile, at the station, Ethan met briefly with his partner, Officer Daniel Briggs. Daniel was in his mid-30s, tall and muscular, with sandy blonde hair cropped short and a square jaw softened by an easy grin. Unlike Ethan's reserved demeanor, Daniel exuded warmth and humor, often lightening tense situations. Yet beneath his cheer lay scars. He had lost a brother in a robbery years ago, a wound that made him fiercely protective of children in particular. "You look like you haven't slept," Daniel remarked, sliding into the seat beside Ethan. Ethan muttered, "It's nothing." But Daniel's sharp blue eyes studied him. "Nothing looks a lot like something. Don't drown alone, partner." Ethan said nothing, but Daniel's words echoed later. Back at home, Marissa called Veronica once again. This time her voice carried sharper edges. "He hesitates, but I need him bound. If he keeps wavering, he'll choose her over me." Veronica's tone, calm and commanding as always, replied, "Then give him no choice. The longer he thinks you're fragile, the longer he doubts himself. Men like Ethan cling to guilt, use his guilt as chains." They discussed plans until footsteps sounded from the hallway. Lily, returning from scrubbing, had paused within earshot. Her eyes widened at the word chains. She turned back quickly, clutching Rocco's collar, whispering, "We'll tell Daddy someday." That evening, the rain that had threatened all day finally came, lashing against the windows with steady fury. Thunder rolled across Maplewood, making the walls tremble. Lily sat at the kitchen table with a small glass of water, no food in sight. Marissa sipped wine, scrolling through her phone. Suddenly, Rocco barked and bounded to the door. Ethan entered, drenched, his jacket soaked through. He dropped his cap on the counter, glancing at the pie still untouched. He frowned, looking toward Lily. Her cheeks flushed as if expecting punishment. Ethan's chest tightened, but Marissa stepped in smoothly. "Helen Turner brought it. I didn't think it wise for Lily to eat sweets after refusing dinner yesterday. I must be cautious with discipline." Ethan's gray eyes flicked to his daughter's lowered gaze, then to Rocco, who stood rigid, tail stiff, eyes locked on Marissa. Something inside Ethan stirred, but the weight of memory pressed heavier. Anna's pale face, her fading breath. His voice cracked with restraint. "Don't push her too hard," he said softly before retreating upstairs. Lily's heart sank. She had hoped, just for a moment, he might have chosen differently. Marissa's lips curved into a triumphant smirk. She whispered so only Lily could hear, "See? He will never stand for you." Lily clutched Rocco, burying her face into his thick coat as rain battered the house. Upstairs, Ethan sat in the dark, head in his hands, blinded by his own ghosts. The storm outside raged, but the storm within this family remained the fiercest of all. The morning after the storm, Maplewood lay washed in a pale silver light, the streets damp and the air cool with the clean scent of rain. Fallen leaves plastered the sidewalks like tired decorations, and children walked to school in boots that splashed through puddles. At Maplewood Elementary, laughter spilled across the playground, though one figure remained apart. Lily Monroe shuffled across the wet pavement with her backpack hanging low, her hair still tangled, her gray-blue eyes dulled by shadows. Rocco trotted beside her until the school gates forced him to stop. He stood there, tail low but resolute, watching her disappear through the doors. Inside the classroom, Angela Porter scanned the rows of bright faces. Angela, with her sharp brown eyes and gentle tone, had the rare gift of balancing firmness and warmth. Her cardigan sleeves were smudged with chalk dust, but her posture radiated calm authority. When her gaze landed on Lily, her heart squeezed. The girl sat hunched, doodling absently in her worn notebook. Angela walked past quietly, catching sight of a sketch. A large German shepherd, standing guard beside a small girl, while a shadowy woman loomed in the background. Angela's suspicions grew heavier. During lunch, Angela sat with a colleague in the teacher's lounge. Mr. Charles Whitman, the school counselor, was in his late 40s, round-shouldered, with a thinning crown of hair and wire-rimmed glasses that often slid down his nose. Known for his patient manner and kind humor, Charles had counseled many children through difficulties at home. Over coffee, Angela lowered her voice. "I'm worried about Lily Monroe. She's withdrawn, underfed, and her drawings, they're not ordinary." Charles adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. "I've noticed her absences, and her posture, always guarded, like she's bracing for something. Do you suspect abuse?" Angela nodded slowly. "I can't ignore what I see anymore." Meanwhile, at the police station, Ethan Monroe reviewed case files, though his concentration frayed with every page. His partner, Daniel Briggs, leaned against the desk. "You're miles away," Daniel said with concern. Ethan sighed, his gray eyes shadowed. "It's Lily. She's not herself. But Marissa swears she's just stubborn." "And Marissa?" His voice caught, guilt rippling beneath. Daniel crossed his arms. "Ethan, you've spent your life reading suspects, liars, criminals. Don't tell me you can't see what's right in front of you." Ethan clenched his jaw, the memory of Anna's death suffocating him again. "If she really is pregnant," Daniel cut in firmly, "pregnancy isn't a shield against truth. You're a cop, Ethan. Don't blind yourself when it's your own child." The words lodged in Ethan's chest like splinters he could not remove. Back at school, Lily sat alone at recess, tracing circles into the dirt with her shoe. A boy from her class approached, timidly. Mateo Alvarez, 9 years old, had curly black hair, bright dark eyes, and a lively smile that usually won friends easily. But today his smile was nervous. He held out half a sandwich wrapped in foil. "My mom made extra," he said. "You can have it." Lily's eyes widened. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "If she finds out, I'll be in trouble." Mateo tilted his head. "Who? Your mom?" Lily bit her lip, her silence answering. Before Angela could approach, the bell rang, and Lily hurried inside. That afternoon, Angela decided she could wait no longer. After dismissal, she called out, "Lily, could you stay for a moment?" The girl froze, clutching her backpack straps tightly. Rocco, who had been waiting faithfully outside, perked his ears as she hesitated. Angela crouched, her voice low and steady. "Sweetheart, you can tell me if something is wrong at home. You don't have to carry it alone." Lily's lips trembled, her gray-blue eyes flicking toward the window, where Rocco's outline waited. For a moment it seemed she might speak, but fear sealed her voice. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "I'm fine, Miss Porter." She bolted toward the door, clinging to Rocco's fur, as if it was the only anchor in her world. Angela watched her go, troubled deeper than ever. She returned to the lounge where Charles still sat, reviewing files. "She's terrified," Angela said softly. Charles folded his hands. "Then it's time to consider reporting. But we need more than suspicion." Angela nodded reluctantly. She knew he was right, yet her heart burned with the urgency of a child in pain. Evening draped itself over Maplewood, the last blush of sunset fading behind bare branches. In the Monroe household, Marissa prepared dinner with her usual flair, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air. She hummed softly as if to paint the picture of warmth. Lily sat at the corner of the table, her plate holding only a few vegetables. Ethan arrived home late, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Marissa's eyes lit with practiced concern. "You're working too hard, Ethan. Sit, eat." He lowered himself into the chair, glancing briefly at Lily's downcast face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Marissa pressed her hand against her stomach, murmuring, For the baby, I must stay calm. I hope you understand how hard it is managing everything." Her words wrapped around him like a chain, guilt pressing heavier. Under the table, Lily's hand reached for Rocco's paw. The German shepherd pressed close, his amber eyes fixed on Ethan as if urging him to see through the veil. Ethan's gaze faltered, torn between the woman he promised to trust and the child who silently begged him for rescue. His silence became its own betrayal. Upstairs later, Lily sat in her small room, the Pikachu toy clutched tight, her stomach aching. Rocco curled at her feet, his head resting across her ankles, his warm breath steady. Through the thin walls, she could hear Marissa's laughter on the phone, her voice sharp when she thought no one listened. Words drifted faintly. "He believes it. A little more time, and everything will be mine." Lily buried her face into Rocco's fur, whispering, "Someday Daddy will know." Rain carried over into the next morning, slicking Maplewood's narrow streets with a glossy sheen. Clouds hung low, pressing against the rooftops as though the town itself were being forced to bow. The police station, a squat brick building with faded blue trim, glowed faintly through the drizzle. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed against the steady tap of keyboards and the murmur of phones ringing. Sergeant Ethan Monroe sat at his desk, a folder thick with photographs resting beside his elbow, his gaze heavy with the truth he could no longer deny. Rocco lay at his feet, the German shepherd's black and silver fur damp from their morning walk. At nearly 6 years old, he had the solid build of a working dog, yet his movements carried the grace of experience. His amber eyes scanned the room with an alertness honed by instinct, but when Ethan's hand lowered to scratch behind his ear, the dog leaned into the touch, a silent bond of reassurance. Detective Sarah Connolly approached, a tall woman in her late 30s with sharp cheekbones and steel-gray eyes that seemed to cut through lies. She wore her chestnut hair in a neat bun, her tailored navy suit emphasizing her precise, orderly nature. Sarah had earned her reputation as one of Maplewood's most tenacious detectives, shaped by a childhood in foster care that left her both fiercely independent and deeply distrustful of facades. She noticed the folder on Ethan's desk, the edges curling from being gripped too tightly. "You look like a man sitting on dynamite," she said, her voice low but pointed. Ethan hesitated. "It's not a case file. It's personal." Sarah's eyes flicked to Rocco, then back to Ethan. "Personal can get dangerous if you let it rot. Either you bury it, or you light the fuse." She started to walk away, but her words lingered. Ethan closed the folder, but the images inside, Marissa's hand raised, Lily's tear-streaked face, burned into him. Later that afternoon, Angela Porter, the teacher with kind yet relentless eyes, arrived at the station. She clutched a folder of her own, filled with Lily's drawings. Angela was petite, with shoulder-length sandy hair and a cardigan fraying at the elbows, the wear of someone who gave too much of herself to others. She asked for Ethan with urgency, her voice trembling slightly as she explained, "These are Lily's. They're not just drawings. They're cries for help." Ethan led her into a quiet office. She spread the sketches across the table, a child cowering, a figure towering above, and always a dog at her side. Angela's voice cracked. "She's telling us in the only way she can." Ethan's chest tightened. He revealed his own photographs in response, sliding them across. Angela's hand flew to her mouth. "Then it's worse than I feared." Angela's visit left Ethan shaken, but it also seeded clarity. He could no longer remain silent. That night, he returned home earlier than usual, the house filled with the aroma of roast chicken. Marissa greeted him with practiced warmth, her auburn hair gleaming under the chandelier. She poured him wine, brushing her hand across his arm, but Ethan's expression remained carved from stone. He watched Lily shuffle from the kitchen, her oversized sweater hanging off her small shoulders, her eyes darting like a sparrow avoiding hawks. Rocco pressed against her side, tail brushing her hand protectively. At the dinner table, Ethan's silence thickened the air. Marissa prattled about charity luncheons and neighborhood gossip, her laughter too sharp, her eyes never resting on Lily. When the girl reached timidly for a piece of bread, Marissa's hand shot out, but before she could snatch it away, Ethan's voice cut across the room. "Enough!" His tone froze her in place. The knife she held trembled slightly, her smile faltering. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. She eats what she wants. Lily's wide eyes flicked between them, disbelief blooming across her face. Rocco gave a low, approving growl. Marissa recovered quickly, her voice dipping into feigned fragility. Darling, I was only guiding her. You know discipline is... Ethan slammed the folder onto the table, the photographs spilling out like accusations. Marissa's face drained of color. Angela's words echoed in his mind. She's telling us in the only way she can. The confrontation was cut short by the shrill ring of Ethan's phone. He answered, voice taut. On the other end was Officer Tim Harker, a young patrolman barely in his mid-20s, with sandy blonde hair and a nervous energy that often made him chatter too much. Tonight, his voice cracked through the line with panic. Sarge, we've got a break-in at your address on Oakwood. Neighbor called it in, said she saw someone prowling. Ethan froze, his free hand tightening into a fist. I'm already home. Silence hung before Tim stammered. Then someone else was there. She swears she saw movement in the yard, behind the house. Ethan's eyes flicked to Marissa, who stood rigid, her knuckles white around the knife. Leaving nothing to chance, Ethan instructed Tim to circle the property. He moved swiftly to the back door, Rocco at his side, muscles taut. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was slick. A shadow darted beyond the fence line. Rocco lunged forward, barking furiously, teeth flashing in the dim light. Ethan raised his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The figure bolted into the woods beyond the property, too quick to identify. When he returned inside, drenched, Marissa's expression had shifted again, this time to one of trembling fear. See, we're not safe. You need me. You need us to stay together. But Ethan was no longer swayed by her shifting masks. He wiped rain from his brow and locked eyes with her. What I need, he said coldly, is the truth. That night, Ethan sat in his study. Rocco sprawled across the rug. Lily curled asleep on the couch wrapped in his old police jacket. He stared at the photographs and Angela's folder, their weight undeniable. Mark's voice replayed in his head. Don't look away when the truth comes. Ethan clenched his jaw. Tomorrow he would act, not just as a father, but as a man sworn to protect. Rain carried over into the next morning, slicking Maplewood's narrow streets with a glossy sheen. Clouds hung low, pressing against the rooftops as though the town itself were being forced to bow. The police station, a squat brick building with faded blue trim, glowed faintly through the drizzle. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed against the steady tap of keyboards and the murmur of phones ringing. Sergeant Ethan Monroe sat at his desk, a folder thick with photographs resting beside his elbow, his gaze heavy with the truth he could no longer deny. Rocco lay at his feet, the German shepherd's black and silver fur damp from their morning walk. At nearly 6 years old, he had the solid build of a working dog, yet his movements carried the grace of experience. His amber eyes scanned the room with an alertness honed by instinct, but when Ethan's hand lowered to scratch behind his ear, the dog leaned into the touch, a silent bond of reassurance. Detective Sarah Connolly approached, a tall woman in her late 30s with sharp cheekbones and steel-gray eyes that seemed to cut through lies. She wore her chestnut hair in a neat bun, her tailored navy suit emphasizing her precise, orderly nature. Sarah had earned her reputation as one of Maplewood's most tenacious detectives, shaped by a childhood in foster care that left her both fiercely independent and deeply distrustful of facades. She noticed the folder on Ethan's desk, the edges curling from being gripped too tightly. "You look like a man sitting on dynamite," she said, her voice low but pointed. Ethan hesitated. "It's not a case file. It's personal." Sarah's eyes flicked to Rocco, then back to Ethan. "Personal can get dangerous if you let it rot. Either you bury it, or you light the fuse." She started to walk away, but her words lingered. Ethan closed the folder, but the images inside, Marissa's hand raised, Lily's tear-streaked face, burned into him. Later that afternoon, Angela Porter, the teacher with kind yet relentless eyes, arrived at the station. She clutched a folder of her own, filled with Lily's drawings. Angela was petite, with shoulder-length sandy hair and a cardigan fraying at the elbows, the wear of someone who gave too much of herself to others. She asked for Ethan with urgency, her voice trembling slightly as she explained, "These are Lily's. They're not just drawings, they're cries for help. Ethan led her into a quiet office. She spread the sketches across the table, a child cowering, a figure towering above, and always a dog at her side. Angela's voice cracked. "She's telling us in the only way she can." Ethan's chest tightened. He revealed his own photographs in response, sliding them across. Angela's hand flew to her mouth. "Then it's worse than I feared." Angela's visit left Ethan shaken, but it also seeded clarity. He could no longer remain silent. That night, he returned home earlier than usual, the house filled with the aroma of roast chicken. Marissa greeted him with practiced warmth, her auburn hair gleaming under the chandelier. She poured him wine, brushing her hand across his arm. But Ethan's expression remained carved from stone. He watched Lily shuffle from the kitchen, her oversized sweater hanging off her small shoulders, her eyes darting like a sparrow avoiding hawks. Rocco pressed against her side, tail brushing her hand protectively. At the dinner table, Ethan's silence thickened the air. Marissa prattled about charity luncheons and neighborhood gossip, her laughter too sharp, her eyes never resting on Lily. When the girl reached timidly for a piece of bread, Marissa's hand shot out, but before she could snatch it away, Ethan's voice cut across the room. "Enough." His tone froze her in place. The knife she held trembled slightly, her smile faltering. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "She eats what she wants." Lily's wide eyes flicked between them, disbelief blooming across her face. Rocco gave a low, approving growl. Marissa recovered quickly, her voice dipping into feigned fragility. "Darling, I was only guiding her. You know discipline is—" Ethan slammed the folder onto the table, the photographs spilling out like accusations. Marissa's face drained of color. Angela's words echoed in his mind. "She's telling us in the only way she can." The confrontation was cut short by the shrill ring of Ethan's phone. He answered, voice taut. On the other end was Officer Tim Harker, a young patrolman barely in his mid-20s, with sandy blonde hair and a nervous energy that often made him chatter too much. Tonight, his voice cracked through the line with panic. "Sarge, we've got a break-in at your address on Oakwood. Neighbor called it in, said she saw someone prowling." Ethan froze, his free hand tightening into a fist. "I'm already home." Silence hung before Tim stammered. "Then someone else was there. She swears she saw movement in the yard, behind the house." Ethan's eyes flicked to Marissa, who stood rigid, her knuckles white around the knife. Leaving nothing to chance, Ethan instructed Tim to circle the property. He moved swiftly to the back door, Rocco at his side, muscles taut. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was slick. A shadow darted beyond the fence line. Rocco lunged forward, barking furiously, teeth flashing in the dim light. Ethan raised his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The figure bolted into the woods beyond the property, too quick to identify. When he returned inside, drenched, Marissa's expression had shifted again, this time to one of trembling fear. "See? We're not safe. You need me. You need us to stay together." But Ethan was no longer swayed by her shifting masks. He wiped rain from his brow and locked eyes with her. "What I need," he said coldly, "is the truth." That night, Ethan sat in his study. Rocco sprawled across the rug. Lily curled asleep on the couch, wrapped in his old police jacket. He stared at the photographs and Angela's folder, their weight undeniable. Mark's voice replayed in his head. "Don't look away when the truth comes." Ethan clenched his jaw. Tomorrow, he would act, not just as a father, but as a man sworn to protect. The morning after the shadow had fled from his backyard, Maplewood awoke under a thin veil of mist. Damp air clung to the streets, softening the outlines of houses and cars parked along cracked sidewalks. The town looked ordinary to anyone passing through, yet to Sergeant Ethan Monroe, the mist carried menace, as though secrets floated in the air, waiting to be revealed. He stood on his porch with a steaming mug of coffee, his jaw tight, his eyes lingering on the fence line where the figure had vanished. Rocco lay at his side, the German shepherd's fur still faintly damp from dew, ears pricked as though he too remembered the disturbance. Inside, Lily sat quietly at the table, scribbling in her worn notebook. The girl had dark circles under her eyes, evidence of nights interrupted by whispered arguments and footsteps in the hall. She glanced up when Ethan came in, forcing a small smile. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of gentleness. "You're safe," he murmured, though the words tasted hollow, burdened by doubt. At the station later that day, Detective Sarah Connolly intercepted him. She carried a file tucked beneath her arm, her expression as sharp as her tailored navy suit. "I ran a check on your property after last night's report," she said. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Everett, is the one who called. She insists she saw a man by the shed." Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know what's strange? A car was parked 2 blocks down. Engine cold, registration traced back to a holding company. Shell Corporation, no traceable owner." Ethan frowned. "Someone's watching my family." Sarah nodded grimly. "And it's not petty crime. This smells of planning." Mrs. Everett herself was a wiry woman in her 60s with silver hair tucked beneath a knit cap. She had been a nurse before retiring, and her sharp eyes rarely missed a detail. Ethan visited her home that evening, a modest 1-story painted pale yellow with flower pots on the porch. She welcomed him with a firm handshake. "I know what I saw," she said, voice unwavering. "Tall man, broad shoulders, moved like he knew where he was going. He wasn't some kid looking to cause trouble." Ethan respected her conviction, jotting details into his notebook. Meanwhile, Angela Porter continued her quiet crusade at school. She began discreetly collecting notes from Lily's classmates, who admitted in hushed tones that they'd seen bruises on the girl's arms or heard her stomach growling during recess. Angela documented everything, her sense of duty outweighing fear. She confided in Charles Whitman, the school counselor, who, despite his cautious nature, agreed to compile an official record. "If this comes to court," Charles said, "it won't be hearsay. It'll be testimony." Back at home, Marissa adjusted her mask of warmth more carefully than ever. She hosted a small afternoon gathering, inviting 2 neighbors for tea. Veronica Santos, a tall brunette with striking green eyes and a penchant for gossip, and Helen Drury, a plump woman with a nervous laugh, sat in the sunlit living room. Marissa charmed them effortlessly, her auburn curls glinting as she poured tea and spoke of Ethan's long hours and her difficult stepdaughter. Ethan, arriving home mid-conversation, froze as he heard Marissa murmur, "I try to be patient, but you know how some children resist discipline." Veronica's brows knit with faint judgment, but Helen only nodded awkwardly. Ethan stepped into the room, his presence silencing Marissa's performance. He offered curt greetings and retreated upstairs, but his heart pounded. She wasn't just abusing Lily, she was weaving a narrative, one that could poison the town against them. Later that night, Ethan met Mark Reyes again in the garage. The retired cop wore a leather jacket and jeans, his graying beard flecked with oil stains from earlier work. He carried a small box of surveillance drives. "You were right," Mark said, sliding the box onto the workbench. "The cameras picked up more. Someone was casing your property for days before you saw that shadow." Ethan's jaw clenched as he flipped through still images. A man in a dark hoodie, face obscured, lingering near the fence at odd hours. "Why would anyone target my family?" he muttered. Mark's voice was steady. "Because someone inside is leaving cracks for them to slip through." Ethan's resolve deepened. He knew now it wasn't just about Marissa's cruelty. Something larger was unraveling. Threads of manipulation and outside involvement. The next day, Sarah introduced Ethan to Detective Paul Garvey, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with kind brown eyes and a slow, deliberate manner of speaking. Unlike Sarah's sharpness, Paul carried a calm gravity, shaped by years of working family abuse cases. His compassion made him a favorite among victims, but his persistence made him a nightmare for offenders. Sarah explained, "Paul's been with CPS liaisons before. He can guide you if this goes official." Paul offered his hand, his grip firm but reassuring. "Whatever's happening, you're not alone in this." That evening, tension in the Monroe household reached a crackling point. Over dinner, Marissa attempted another display of authority, scolding Lily for spilling a drop of water. Before Ethan could intervene, Rocco stood, hackles raised, a growl vibrating from his chest. Marissa's face paled, and for a flicker, she lost her composure. Ethan rose slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. His voice was low, each word deliberate. "No more." The air grew taut, silence pressing against the walls. Lily's eyes widened, a fragile hope sparking in them. Later, when Lily had gone to bed, Ethan sat in the dimly lit study, staring at the files gathered: photographs, drawings, testimonies, surveillance images. Rocco curled at his feet, his steady breathing the only sound in the room. Ethan pressed his palms together, his voice a whisper. It ends soon. The rain had lifted by dawn, leaving Maplewood washed clean, but tense with silence. Thin sunlight pierced through low clouds, turning puddles into mirrors along Oakwood Street. Inside the Monroe home, Lily sat at the breakfast table, her small hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of cocoa Ethan had made for her. Her chestnut hair, still tangled from sleep, framed a pale face with cautious hope in her blue-gray eyes. Rocco lay under the table, tail brushing against her ankles, his amber gaze fixed on the doorway as if expecting trouble. Marissa descended the stairs in a silk robe, her auburn curls brushed into waves that shimmered under the light. She moved with practiced grace, but her eyes, sharp hazel behind a veil of feigned calm, flicked instantly toward Lily's mug. "Sweet things before school?" she said, her voice lilting with mock concern. Ethan, standing at the counter in his uniform, spoke flatly. "I made it." For a moment, the tension crackled like static, but Marissa only forced a smile, sliding into her seat with the ease of someone who knew how to maintain appearances. At the station later, Detective Sarah Connolly brought fresh leads. She dropped a folder onto Ethan's desk, her gray eyes intense. "Remember the car we traced near your property?" I dug deeper. The shell company's lawyer is Mark Herrera. He's been disbarred once before for document fraud, but somehow slipped back through the cracks. Guess who he's been connected to recently? She flipped the page, revealing a photograph of Marissa at a cafe, seated with Herrera and another woman. Ethan's chest tightened. "Who's the woman?" Sarah tapped the page. "Linda Vargas, Marissa's older sister. Reputation for manipulation runs in the family." That evening, Ethan decided to visit Linda Vargas in person. She lived in a modern condo on the other side of town, its glass windows gleaming against the gray sky. Linda was in her 40s, tall and striking with jet black hair cut into a sharp bob. She wore a crimson blazer and spoke with icy poise, her green eyes cool and assessing. When Ethan confronted her, she arched a brow. "Accusing me of something, Sergeant?" Her tone was smooth, but her fingers drummed restlessly on the counter. Ethan read the tells easily. Years on the force had taught him to spot nerves beneath masks. "Stay away from my daughter," he said, voice firm. Linda laughed lightly, though it rang hollow. "Children grow strong under pressure. Maybe you should thank Marissa." Ethan's jaw tightened. He left with more questions, but his instinct screamed that Linda was not just an accessory, she was orchestrating. Meanwhile, at Maplewood Elementary, Angela Porter continued gathering evidence. She introduced Ethan to Principal Howard Bennett, a stout man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. Known for his fair but cautious nature, Bennett had spent decades steering children and teachers through storms of conflict. "Sergeant," he said gravely, "I've reviewed the notes Angela compiled. I'm mandated to report if a child's safety is compromised. But these matters get tangled quickly. If you're ready to pursue, we'll back you." Ethan felt the weight of his badge pressing heavier that day, not as an officer, but as a father. That night, after Lily went to bed, Ethan sat in his study, Rocco curled nearby. He spread photographs and documents across the desk. Marissa's cruelty, the drawings Angela preserved, the surveillance footage Mark had secured. But what gnawed at him was the glimpse of a man near his property. Who was he working for? Marissa, Linda, or someone else altogether? The answer came sooner than expected. Around midnight, a knock rattled the door. Ethan reached for his sidearm and opened cautiously. On the porch stood Eduardo Salazar, a tall man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair slicked back. Dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, his broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his dark eyes gleamed with a mix of charm and menace. Eduardo was known in Maplewood's business circles for his construction empire, but whispered rumors tied him to deals that skirted legality. "I thought we should talk," Eduardo said smoothly, stepping inside without invitation. He looked around the home with a critical eye before settling his gaze on Ethan. "You're chasing shadows, Sergeant. Not every battle can be fought with fists and files." Ethan bristled. "What do you want?" Eduardo smirked. To offer perspective, Marissa and Linda, they play games you don't understand. Best not to challenge them. You've already lost one woman. Do you want to lose more? His words slid like oil, heavy with insinuation. Rocco barked sharply, breaking the silence. Eduardo flinched slightly before regaining composure. He set a card on the table. When you're ready to listen, call me. Then he left, his polished shoes echoing across the porch. Ethan stared at the card, fury simmering. He understood now. This wasn't only about domestic cruelty. It was a web of greed and manipulation stretching further than his home. The next morning, Sarah and Paul Garvey met Ethan at a diner on Main Street. Paul, with his calm demeanor and brown eyes that softened the hardest truths, leaned across the booth. If Eduardo's in this, you're up against more than lies. You're up against power. But the law bends only if you let it. Sarah added, we need airtight evidence, enough to crush Marissa's mask and everyone behind her. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we'll get it. Back at home, Marissa tried once more to maintain control. She cooked dinner, laughter spilling too loudly as she told Lily stories that rang false. But Lily's eyes stayed lowered, her small hands fidgeting with Rocco's fur beneath the table. Ethan watched silently. The photographs and testimonies burned into his mind. He wasn't fooled anymore. When Lily excused herself to bed, Marissa leaned across the table, her smile brittle. You're distant, Ethan. Don't let outside voices poison what we've built. Ethan leaned forward, his voice like steel. What you've built is crumbling, and soon everyone will see it. Marissa's eyes flashed with fury before softening back into a mask. But Ethan saw through it now. The cracks were widening, and he would make sure the whole facade collapsed. The day of reckoning rose over Maplewood with a hard golden light that cut through the fog of the town. For weeks, secrets had brewed in silence, but now the streets themselves seemed restless, as though waiting for confrontation. Ethan Monroe stood outside the courthouse, his uniform pressed, his shoulders squared, but his jaw tense. Beside him, Lily clutched his hand, her small figure wrapped in a white dress with a blue ribbon at the waist. She looked fragile, yet steady, like a wildflower pushing through cracks in stone. Rocco trotted close, his black and silver fur sleek in the morning sun, amber eyes sharp as blades. Reporters had gathered already, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Questions buzzed. Sergeant Monroe, is it true your wife claims you abandoned her while pregnant? Is the child safe? Ethan shielded Lily with his arm, ignoring the clamor. Detective Sarah Connolly and Detective Paul Garvey emerged from the side entrance, flanking him. Sarah, tall and severe in a charcoal blazer, moved like a sword unsheathed, her eyes narrowed toward the press. Paul's calm baritone cut through the noise. Step aside. This is a case hearing, not a spectacle. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tension. At the front sat Judge Alton Reeves, a dignified man in his 60s with silver hair, combed meticulously back. His reputation was unshakable, a man who despised manipulation, having once seen his own brother's family torn apart by lies. His stern brown eyes swept the room as he rapped his gavel. Order! Marissa sat at the defendant's table, her auburn hair styled into soft curls, her face painted with delicate restraint. But her hazel eyes darted nervously when she saw Ethan holding Lily's hand. Beside her was Linda Vargas, cold in a tailored navy suit, lips pressed thin. Eduardo Salazar lingered in the gallery, his tailored gray suit immaculate, but his gaze predatory. Their lawyer, Mark Herrera, pale and sweating beneath the collar, avoided eye contact with anyone. The prosecution opened with Esteban Flores, a seasoned attorney with salt and pepper hair and a hawk-like gaze. He laid out the photographs, drawings, and surveillance footage. The screen lit up with images of Lily kneeling on the floor, tears streaking her cheeks, Rocco lunging forward to protect her as Marissa raised her hand. Gasps swept the gallery. Angela Porter was called to the stand. In her modest cardigan and glasses, she looked every bit the dedicated teacher she was, but her voice carried conviction. Lily told us in her drawings what words couldn't. She was afraid, and I could not ignore it. She presented the sketches, explaining how children often revealed their realities in art. The courtroom listened in hushed silence. Then, Mrs. Everett, the the retired nurse neighbor, stepped up. Her wiry frame and sharp silver eyes radiated resolve. "I saw a man by their shed. I called because I knew something was wrong. A child's safety depends on neighbors refusing to look away." Her testimony linked the larger conspiracy. Surveillance wasn't paranoia. It was real. Finally, Ethan took the stand. In his uniform, with Rocco lying obediently at his feet, he looked both soldier and father. His voice trembled only once when he described the night he finally saw the footage. "I am trained to protect strangers every day, yet I failed my own daughter in my own home. That ends now." He turned to Lily, his eyes softening. "You will never be alone again." When Marissa's turn came, she attempted the mask once more. She clutched her stomach, claiming pregnancy, sobbing about abandonment. But Sarah Connolly rose with new evidence. Forged medical records traced directly to Linda and Herrera. Paul Garvey presented testimony from clinic staff, confirming no such pregnancy existed. Eduardo shifted uncomfortably in the gallery as whispers rippled. Judge Reeves's gavel struck. "Silence," his voice thundered. "This court has heard enough deception. This is no matter of discipline. This is cruelty, fraud, and conspiracy." He turned to Marissa. "You have not only failed as a stepmother, but manipulated trust to shield your actions. You are hereby sentenced to 7 years for child abuse and fraud." Linda received 3 years of probation. Herrera was struck from the bar permanently. Eduardo, though untouched directly, was warned under oath that his dealings would be investigated. His eyes narrowed, a serpent sensing its lair collapsing. The gavel came down one final time. Ethan exhaled, a weight lifting at last. Lily bolted from her seat into his arms, her small body trembling, but safe. The courtroom broke into murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously, but Ethan heard nothing but his daughter whispering, "Daddy, we're free now." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." Outside, the courthouse steps filled with sunlight. Neighbors who had once whispered now approached with nods of respect. Angela knelt to hug Lily, tears glistening in her eyes. Mrs. Everett clasped Ethan's hand firmly. "You did right by her." Sarah crossed her arms, smirking faintly. "Took you long enough, Monroe." Ethan managed a tired smile. "Better late than never." As the crowd dispersed, Ethan led Lily and Rocco down the steps. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. That evening, they returned home to a quiet house. Lily curled up on the couch with Rocco beside her, clutching her old notebook. Instead of scribbling sorrow, she drew a sun rising over a house with herself, Ethan, and Rocco standing in front, smiling. Ethan placed the drawing on the fridge, his chest tightening with pride. Later, as dusk deepened into night, Ethan stood by Lily's bedroom door. She was already asleep. Rocco sprawled across the floor like a sentinel. Ethan whispered into the silence, "I promise you, Anna, she's safe. Now." His eyes lingered on the stars outside the window, each one burning with quiet defiance. For the first time in years, Ethan believed in dawn again. At the heart of this story lies a reminder that even in the darkest nights, God can send us small miracles through love, loyalty, and courage. Just as this child found protection and hope, we too can discover God's hand guiding us in our everyday struggles. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder and lightning, but a gentle shield, a loyal companion, or the strength to stand up for what is right. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss these moments of hope. And if you believe in the miracle of God's protection, write Amen in the comments. May God bless you and your loved ones today and always.